Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil. I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. Now, today I've wanted to make a video on something that I've been thinking about recently. I know that if you have been paying attention to the channel and podcast, I'm a huge fan of Rosenberg. He is my favorite board game designer, and I enjoy pretty much all of his games and will focus a lot of attention on them, both with playing as well as with content on YouTube, etc. But I do enjoy other games as well, as you have noticed, and I've been thinking, I do have a set of games that I enjoy, but can I group some of them by designer, and can I kind of rank some of my favorite designers based off of the games that I have played from them, as well as games when I hear about a new anticipated game from said designer? How excited am I personally willing to play that game, review it, rather than just by following what everyone else is saying about a particular game or a particular designer and having, that encouragement from the populace throw me into a game, right? And so what is inherently my motivation to play some of these games based off of the designer in particular? I've covered before some of my favorite themes, and I think you can kind of gather my favorite mechanisms in games as well. But this video is solely dedicated to the designers that I've come to enjoy in the experiences I've had playing board games. So as you can see, there are some criteria here that I have given myself to ranking my favorite designers. I must have played more than one game designed by this particular designer for this list to count. For example, I love Ark Nova, but as far as I know, Matthias Wieck his only design is Ark Nova, or I have not played any of his other designs, if he has any, to make that count towards this list. So once again, designers that I pay attention to, especially around this season when a lot of anticipated games are being announced, whether it's for retail now or for the soon-to-be future. What would rank for me, highly for these designers is, how anticipated and excited I am to try their latest game. And so I will take that into account, as well as the games that I have played by them. All of these games that I do mention that I have played as well will be rated 7 or above on the scale found on Board Game Geek. And in general, these are games that I'm likely to play repeatedly, such as a digital version of the game on an app or on Board Game Arena, a game that I could play physically, solo, that I find enjoyable, or because I have a harder time these days finding the time to play board games physically with other people on the regular. And so games that are available to play digitally are preferred. So let's get into this list and let's talk about some designers. So my number 10th designer, my 10th favorite at this time, is Cole Wehrle. Now, he beat out a lot of other great designers, once again, of single games that I've really enjoyed, probably enjoy more than the games listed here, and other designers that I've played multiple games of. It was really close to narrow down my top 10, but so Cole Wehrle just made it out, and I think part of it is because I respect a lot of his games, in addition to enjoying them. I really enjoy Root. I think Root is a very interactive and fun game. The asymmetry makes it the grandeur of the asymmetry of each faction and how differently they play makes it have a sense of replayability as well as mastery, and that is also evident in Arcs. Now, Arcs is such an interesting game that I covered not too long ago. Maybe this is part of the recency bias towards the game of Arcs, but there's so much to explore in this game, especially with the expansion and the campaign mode. But even the base game, even after one round, I was so impressed by Arcs that I think Arcs has carried my opinion of Cole Wehrle quite far. I do enjoy Pax Pamir, especially or specifically second edition. It is a game that I mostly respect. I would feel it is a little opaque, and I do appreciate the historic approach to this game and other PAX games by other designers as well. It is a little bit harder for me to wrap my head around, like the actual strategy of it. And this applies to a lot of other Whirly games such as Oath and John Company, games that I haven't played but seem to be very unique. Some of them very historically based, and perhaps that's where a lot of the mechanisms come from, or at least a period of time and things like I'm thinking of John Company, and from what I understand, what I've heard about that game, it's very much a simulator, simulating the experience of creating and managing a shipping company or etc. And so I think there's a lot of thought that goes behind the creation of these games to make abstractions here and there that not only make the game flow mechanically, but also represent the topic matter at hand very well. And so I really appreciate and respect his designs, and I think the interactivity and the smartness of how streamlined some mechanisms are to how well they tie into the overall setting and theme at hand it's reminiscent of Rosenberg games, which obviously are more Euro style in nature, and they utilize different mechanisms that I prefer in general compared to Whirly games. But I think the approach is very similar, and you might sense a theme as I talk about these designers and these games, that I really appreciate games with an adherence to theme, with the blended thematic / mechanical presentation of the game to make them feel very interesting and replayable. So my number 10 is going to be Cole Whirly. My number 9 designer is Simone Luciani, and I really enjoy some of his games. I really enjoy and respect designs like Barrage and Nucleum and Teletum, specifically in recent memory. Now, I do acknowledge that all of these games have multiple designers on them. For example, David Turksey, Nucleum, Daniele Tascini on Teletum, but he does seem to be the denominator behind a lot of these games that I have really enjoyed in recent memory and recent plays. And not all of Simone's games are hits for me. For example, the latest Darwin's Journey was sort of a miss for me. I think a lot of the game, and there are other games too, he has such a catalog of games that he either has designed himself or is a part of for the majority of them. I generally am very interested to see what he does put out year by year, and especially when they fall in the category of games such as these three as are depicted, I start to really pay attention to and see what those designs are. And so that's perhaps one of the reasons why Simone is at the lower end of my spectrum for designers that I look out for, perhaps because of the fact that he does design with other people, and that not all of his designs have been a hit for me. But he is very prolific, and he has a lot of good designs that I individually hold very high in high esteem. And so my number 9 is Simone Luciani. So my number 8 designer is actually a couple of designers, Isra C. and Shay S. And so this duo has produced a couple of games that I have been really enjoying. The White Castle in particular was one of my favorite designs from last year, and Red Cathedral is really good too, and Flatiron is their newest release from this year at Essen. And a lot of these games share the presentation and the ability of these games to be small in nature, physically with the box as well as components and everything. The games are relatively short, but they pack so much punch and provide so many tough decisions to make from turn to turn. And something that I really appreciate that in a design, due to my circumstances, just having 2 young kids, a lot of you may be able to understand that timing is pretty limited when you have a young family, and so having ample time to play a game that's 2, 3, 4 hours long is very hard to come by. And so if you can get a really good and interesting and complex game to an hour or so, or even under, that is like the sweet spot for me. And so that's what a lot of these designs offer. And so their design, I guess, philosophy of approaching games, providing perhaps not the most complex games out there, but the ability to still provide a crunchy and interesting game in such a short time frame to play with is just amazing. And so I highly recommend, and I do follow their releases, and so I'm always keen and interested to see what they come up with next. And so that's my number 8, Ezra C. and Shay S. My number 7 is Matthew Dunstan. Now, I've mentioned him very recently, especially with games from his new publisher called Postmark Games, where they've made games like Waypoints, which have honestly been a breath of fresh air in a lot of the typical games that I have come across. So I have Jacob to thank for. But even before that, like the Guild of Merchant Explorers, having played this game a couple of years ago, thanks to Jacob as well, actually, I really came to appreciate and enjoy these games. I think they're among some of my favorite lighter weight games to play. One, because they feel they are light in nature, and so they're easy to teach and easy to bring out with other people. But also at the same time, the amount of things that you can do and on each of your turns, I'm looking at the Guild of Merchant Explorers and Waypoints in particular, just seem to be so dramatic and expansive, much more than what appears at first glance. I really appreciate his design approach to making each turn feel very, I guess, dramatic and very like there are so many different good decisions that you have to choose from, despite it being a very lightweight type of game. I guess as an honorable mention, Brett J. Gilbert is also listed on a lot of these designs that I do enjoy. But as a whole, I think Matthew Dunstan, if his name is on it, I will be looking at those. I put Monumental up here as well, just because this is a game that I've always been interested in playing, but I've never had the chance to play it yet. I know it is a Matthew Dunstan game, it's a Civilization-themed game, and it looks to be a little bit heavier than some of these other games that I do enjoy, and so I'm excited to see what Monumental has to offer, if I ever do get the chance to play it. But other than that, I do pay attention to what he has to offer each year when it comes to designs. I really enjoy a lot of these Postmark games as well, and so yeah, I'm just a fan of how lightweight yet complex some of these games from Matthew Dunstan have been, in the last couple of years. So Matthew Dunstan, my number 7. So my number 6 is going to be Martin Wallace. Now, Martin Wallace obviously has been touted for the number 1 Board Game Geek game of all time as of this moment, Brass Birmingham, as well as his design, Brass Lancashire. All excellent designs, and they follow a pattern that I really enjoy in games with high interactivity, and that interactivity mostly being centered on a central board where everyone is moving tokens around and interacting with. And so there's the economics behind it as well. It's a very economic heavy game, and so I've really enjoyed those games, and this game in particular. I think it's probably the most streamlined and approachable, not approachable, but I guess it's probably the easiest game for me personally to be intrigued and motivated to play, while fitting in with the more economic heavy side of board games. You have a lot of games like 18xx type of games, train games in general, which are very economic and in their nature and by their mechanisms. And that's why I put Steam here as well. I do enjoy Steam. It's probably not my favorite theme to play a game centered on trains, but I really do enjoy Steam for a lot of the same reasons that I enjoy Brass, with the high interactivity on the center board as well as the modularity of Steam in particular, of how the game setup is different. You have different maps that you can play on as well. This kind of follows into Age of Steam in particular, where there are a ton of maps that you can play on. I haven't played that particular game yet, but that is also Martin's design. Other games that I've really enjoyed, Tinner's Trail, Via Nebula is an interesting lighter weight game that follows the same pattern as Brass. It's like Brass Light. And so that's a game that we actually own and enjoy. Anno 1800 is a little bit different from a lot of these other games. It is somewhat economic in nature as well, but it's a lot of just really fun, like order fulfillment, tableau building, and resource collection. It's got a ton of resources, very similar in the veins of a game like Or et Labora. And so that I think that connection with Rosenberg is kind of why I really do enjoy Anno 1800 as well. I think Martin Wallace makes it out of my top 5 because there are a lot of designs of his that I haven't tried, and a lot of his designs that I think are a little bit too opaque for my tastes to approach and even try in the first place. And he does have a lot of designs. He's very prolific as well, and so not all of his designs are going to hit for me, but he does have a lot of top hitters for me that make it so that I do pay attention to his games very often, and a small percentage of games that I do end up playing from him, even if it was just these 3, for example, I've enjoyed them so much that I highly regard him as a designer and his approach to games. And so my number 6, Martin Wallace. So my number 5 is Vital Lacerda. He's a designer that I actually have played a lot of his games thus far. I was particularly drawn to his games because they were kind of like the next step for me when I started to explore more Euro-style games. And since a lot of his games were in the top 100 anyway, such as Lisboa and On Mars, it was pretty easy to kind of direct myself in that direction and play them. Now, I really enjoy Lisboa and On Mars. On Mars is probably my favorite space-themed game, or at least Mars-themed game, that I can think of. It's pretty close between this and Terraforming Mars, but I really enjoy the designs that he creates. I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on the subject matter at hand when coming up with the inspirations of the mechanisms that are utilized in these games. I think that, especially with Lisboa, I feel like there was so much history behind this, and it's a part of history that I am particularly interested in. He is Portuguese, I am half Brazilian myself, and so a lot of what he does with games like this, and Venus as well, have a lot of personal connection to me in a way. And so the only thing is that his games are very difficult to learn and process, but I think after you get over that hunch or that hurdle, that they become a little bit easier to play and understand. And I think there's a lot of connection to theme as well, that if you understand thematically what is going on in the game as you take your turns, then mechanically it starts to flow a lot easier. I haven't been the biggest fan. I've enjoyed recent games like Inventions, Weather Machine not as much, and the newest release, Speakeasy, has been in the hotness recently. This one I am interested in trying out, actually. I've been learning a little bit about how it plays and the rules, etc. And so potentially, I'm not going to make any promises right now, but potentially I would cover this on the channel as well at some point in the future. But it's just so hard to wrap my head around each new game, as they feel very distinct from one another, and there are things that are mechanically used over and over again or feel similar from game to game. And of course, the overall impression that his games provide is that you take an action which cascades into multiple different bonuses and sub actions that you take at this, after you initially choose something to do on your turn, that it creates a cascade of information, bonuses, and processes that are a part of the reason why his games are so complex. But a lot of people think they're complex in a very fun way, in a very thematic way, and I do agree with that as well. So my number 5, Vital Lacerda. My number 4 is a pair of designers, Domen and Viersinga, a part of Splatterspielen. So these guys have created games for a long time, and a lot of these games I have not played yet. I am interested and a little bit intimidated to try some of their newer games, or some of their other games that I haven't played, like Indonesia, the Great Zimbabwe, etc. Hopefully, because I just don't want to be let down or anything, but I have to say a lot of what carries my opinion of these two and their company essentially is through Roads and Boats. This game was so cool to play, and I think it was one of the closest games that reminded me of what I enjoyed to play like on the computer from many years back, and reading into the history of, I believe it was Virsinga. He is a computer programmer himself. He plays a lot of computer and makes a lot of computer games as well, and so perhaps there's a lot of connection and inspiration there that I appreciate and have subconsciously appreciated until finding out that fact. And so games like Roads and Boats, where I don't know, I've dedicated a whole video on Roads and Boats. Feel free to go and I guess a podcast on it, so feel free to check that out. If there's anything here, of course, that you can't find readily on YouTube, it's either on the podcast, but I am more than happy to make a link of that if you ask for it. But in any case, I really enjoy Roads and Boats. Bus and Horseless Carriage are some of the other notable games that I've played recently that are really fun as well. They're very interactive, they're very thematic, very similar in vein with games, or designers rather, like Vital Lacerda and Wallace, etc. And so, heavy economic, very highly thematic games that are tough to learn. Well, they're somewhat tough to learn, but they're tough to master. And so a lot of these games have a huge potential for me to really get into and enjoy. And so I really respect these designs. I should play some of their other games just so I can have a complete understanding of their design philosophy. But from what I have seen thus far, I've really enjoyed and look forward to more games from Splatterspielen. My number 3 designer is Jeffrey CCH. So if you have been following me recently, you know that I've been very impressed with games such as Age of Civilization and Age of Galaxy, as well as Epochs. And these 3 games in particular have been kind of the foundation of why I really enjoy his designs, and I guess the designs of his team collectively at ICE makes. They take it's very similar to the thoughts that I've had of like Isra C and Shay S, where they take a game design or a setting or a theme and compact it into such a small package, but that package provides a lot of interesting decisions, and in these cases a lot of replayability as well. It's the kind of replayability, especially in all 3 of these games, that I really particularly enjoy, which is the variety of cards and or tiles that make each game feel different. The way that they are displayed and offered for you create for different decisions to make from game to game and end up in different avenues of how you decide you want to score points. And so if you could do that in the time frame which it takes to play some of these games, it is amazing. I've really enjoyed his branch into a heavier and longer game with a civilization theme in Epochs. You can check out my video on that from months back when the Kickstarter was ongoing. This will be a 2025 game, but it will probably be highly rated if and when I make a video of my top games of next year. Epochs was just a lot of fun, and so yeah, I really enjoy this style of game, as you've seen with my appreciation for designs that are small yet complex, and I think Jeffrey CCH does it the best for me. My number 2 is Vladimir Suchy, and this may not come as a surprise to you. I've really enjoyed his games, and often times will be checking out his games, as he is very prolific and comes out with about a game a year. It all started with Underwater Cities, and what I really enjoyed about this game, which is available on Yucata to play, is the variability that comes with the cards that you play onto the kind of worker placement action, combining different ways to take turns when you take a turn. And so that, coupled with the tableau building and the different ways to score points, just makes Underwater Cities a highly rated game overall, but very highly rated for me as well. Because I guess ultimately what Vladimir does is his games, I think, come the closest to what I appreciate most about Rosenberg, where the variety in games a lot of the times comes from cards, and there's an element of tableau building and very Euro style scoring as well. And he does it in a way that is not terribly complex rules-wise when it comes to games, in comparison, like to Lacerda games, or etc. Right? They're not as rules-heavy as games in those ilk. They're very much more, in a sense, streamlined compared to, or in line with games from Rosenberg. So all that to say, I feel like he's the one designer that I feel like mirrors and comes as close to Rosenberg as possible for me personally. Not to say that all of his designs follow suit in where I find them to be enjoyable. Of course, I don't like every single one of Rosenberg's games, but I enjoy the majority of them. The same is applicable for Suhi as well. But I have really appreciated some of these games, like Messina 1347. Evacuation from last year was really cool as well. Once again, utilizing cards to if you play with the advanced mode, you have a deck of cards which have individualized actions or combinations of actions that you can take. And so that understanding of those action cards, and as well as how the game plays as well, is just, this has a lot of potential for me to rise up in games that I enjoy overall. And so, yeah, I've really enjoyed his games. I haven't played them all. I look forward to doing so at some point. But yeah, I am always intrigued. I will try to play Rasafa, his newest release from this year, and see if I enjoy that as well. But yeah, I think he comes the closest for me when it comes to the style of board game design, the way that it plays, how quickly you can learn it, and how a game is mastered as well through repeated plays. I think it doesn't get much better other than Rosenberg for me than it does with Suhi. So that is my list. This video should have been called my top 9 favorite designers other than Rosenberg, but interestingly, I have made a podcast almost a year ago about the top 10 reasons why Rosenberg games are my favorite. And so I may or may not create that as a kind of a video and transfer it to YouTube for you to explore this topic further of why I enjoy Rosenberg games. I'm pretty sure that the same material is going to be the same as it is now. And so I will include that for your leisure in the near future. Other than that, thank you for sticking around and listening to why I enjoy these designers. It doesn't mean that I enjoy all of their games, and some of these games from designers farther down the list I enjoy perhaps more than some of the games higher up on the list. But I think if you look at the games and the design philosophy and everything collectively, I think this is how my ordering is when it comes to especially new games that are coming out from these designers and how closely I pay attention to them. So thank you for joining me on this journey and consulting with me today. Hope that you schedule an appointment with your board gaming doctor real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.